So welcome and good evening, everyone. You're joining the network of wellbeing at Less is More, Rethinking Consumption for a Wellbeing Economy. Lovely to see you all here. Really excited about this evening's event. I'm Flo Shalom from the Network of Wellbeing, and I'm going to be hosting this evening. I'm also joined with some of my Network of Wellbeing colleagues, Roger, Mirella and Josh, who are going to be helping out with the chat box and just kind of generally supporting throughout the event. Yeah, so as we just wait for people to arrive, it would be really lovely if you want to just say a quick hello in the chat box, perhaps let us know where you're joining from, because it's always really lovely to welcome people into these spaces and see where people are joining us from and have a kind of interactive discussion with each other as much as possible within this format. So I see Josh is already saying hello from Devon in Southwest UK. Thanks, Josh, for getting the ball rolling. And whilst you guys are saying your hellos, I'm just going to share a few really practical things about this event. I know we're all very accustomed to using Zoom likely now for events and meetings, but I just want to share a few kind of things specific to this event. Firstly, we are recording the event this evening, so that's just to make it available to you guys afterwards and also to anyone that can't join live. And we really love it if you can keep your cameras on if possible, so that we can see people's faces and have a kind of collective feeling of being in the event together. But that said, we totally understand if you prefer to have your camera off, and because we're recording, just know that there's like a small chance if you are unmuted at some point that you might appear on the recording, so just being aware of that. Generally, we love you to just stay muted throughout the event in the main room, just so that we can really clearly hear the main speaker talking at that time. But we will have as interactive event as possible this evening. So we'll be having breakout rooms, and we'll really be encouraging you to ask questions in the chat box and share your own projects and ideas and suggestions around this topic. So like I say, as much as possible, we really want to make this an interactive discussion with you guys. We have some amazing speakers lined up as well for you this evening, which we're really looking forward to hearing from on this topic around less is more, rethinking consumption for a wellbeing economy. I think we really wanted to look at the kind of theoretical overview and also some really practical examples related to this topic. But now that a few more of us have arrived, I'm actually, before we go any further in the event, I'm going to invite us to do a really brief mindfulness practice. And if you are not accustomed to doing any mindfulness, no worries at all. It's going to be no more than a minute practice, but it's just to help encourage us to arrive in this event together and take a moment to kind of, set an intention for being here together. So to do that, I'll just invite you to just check in with how you're sitting, just making sure you're kind of comfortable in your chair or wherever you're sitting. And just for a moment, just like lowering your gaze, if it's possible for you to do so, just lowering your gaze away from the screen, and just, if you'd like to, you can even close your eyes. Just taking a few slightly deeper breaths. Just feeling the effect of allowing yourself to just briefly pause, just feeling the effect of that on your body. And just taking a moment to reflect on what inspired you to join the event this evening. So this concept of less is more, kind of consuming less and having more well-being. Just reflecting on what drew you to being here, what inspired you. And just knowing that inspiration, that curiosity is likely shared by many others joining the event this evening. So even though that we're separated by a screen, we're still connected in that way. And just taking a few more deep breaths as we prepare to gently come back together as a group. So whenever you feel ready to do so, if your eyes have been closed, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze back up to the screen. So thanks so much for taking just a little minute to pause collectively like that. It's always nice to, to come together in that way. I'm going to welcome to all those that are continuing to join in the event. We're going to have, like I mentioned, 4 speakers at the event this evening. And I'm going to, without further ado, introduce our first speaker, which I'm really excited to hear from all of our speakers actually, but it's great to have Andrew Sims to kick us off. Andrew is an author, political economist and campaigner. He's co-director of the New Weather Institute, coordinator of Rapid Transition Alliance and assistant director of Scientists for Global Responsibility. And he's also a research associate at the University of Sussex, which funnily enough, I actually went to the University of Sussex, Andrew, which I didn't mention to you, which is a nice link. He also was previously the policy director of the New Economics Foundation for many years, and he's written many books, including Cancel the Apocalypse, Ecological Debt, and recently Economics, a Crash Course. And also relevant to this evening's topic, he also co-authored a book on new materialism, how our relationship with the material world can change for the better. So yeah, really excited to hear what you have to share with us this evening, Andrew, and over to you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to start straight away with get the technical stuff. And I'm going to go very quickly through all of this because we've just got 10 minutes each. And what I'm going to do is set a little bit of the background to the issue, because we don't arrive at it anew. And sometimes it helps not to have to reinvent things. So I'm going to go back to the time when I was working at the New Economics Foundation. As was mentioned, I'm currently with the Rapid Transition Alliance, and I'll go full loop and end up back with the work that we're doing at the moment. But if I go back here, people will probably be quite familiar now with the 5 ways to well-being. This came out of work at the Centre for Wellbeing at the New Economics Foundation, when we were aware that there was an awful lot known about the things which did improve our well-being beyond a level of basic sufficiency having been achieved and certain basic needs being met. And these were things like the ability to connect with others, being active, taking notice of the world around us, always being in a kind of a situation where we're learning things, and also giving and sharing, and that these were powerful drivers of our heightened well-being. We took a leaf out of the book of the 5-a-day fruit and vegetable eating for good health, and came up with the 5 ways to well-being. And this has now become incorporated in lots of institutional work and become quite a handy little guide. You find it kind of, when I was looking for a visual to use, I found dozens of them from lots of different organizations. So that one. And then we did, we thought, well, how can we integrate this into wider work, into sort of what was considered at the time, I suppose, the hard world of economic policy? And there was a lot of debate then, as there is now, and as there has been for the last 50 years, about the inadequacies of economic indicators, specifically growth as an indicator. And we thought, well, how can we come up with something which measures fundamentals like our well-being and our ecological impact? And we brought together what was called a composite indicator. And the thing which helped it to travel was the fact that we called it the Happy Planet Index. It was actually kind of about well-being. What it measured was our relative life satisfaction, our relative life expectancy as a very good proxy for a lot of other human development indicators, and our ecological footprint. And we came up with this Happy Planet Index, and it gave a completely different way of looking at the relative success of our economies and societies at delivering relatively long and happy lives, but with a smaller ecological footprint. And we could see how different countries were performing. What it showed us was that rich countries did very badly because they had very high ecological footprints. Very poor countries that didn't have their basic needs met also did badly. Interestingly, we found all around the world, small island states did very well at having relatively low ecological impact and relatively high well-being. And there were lots of lessons in there. You can still find all these reports on the website. Here's a big thing. Here was our big insight. One of the big insights. We did some very large sample surveys looking across the UK and looking across the rest of Europe. And the striking thing that we found is that when you're talking about societies where most basic needs, physical needs, sufficiency needs are met, the difference between the relationship between how much you consume and your life satisfaction has almost completely broken down. The graph you're looking at here is based upon the responses of tens of thousands of people across Europe. And what it shows is that people were reporting very low levels of consumption, down at 1 planet living, which is incredibly hard to do with all the lock-ins of high consumption at the moment, all the way up to around about 7 planet living. But when you looked at the relative life satisfaction, there was no relationship. This was one of the profound early insights that has guided a lot of work subsequently. Then we also looked at the way in which we could kind of apply some of these principles, and we looked at in our consumption patterns with the rest of the world, and we looked at how these very high consuming lifestyles that were not delivering relatively higher well-being were drawing upon the rest of the world's resources. And we came up with a measure called the Earth Overshoot Day, which gave us an indicator of the day in the year when globally or at a national level we start to live beyond our environmental means. We were bringing lots of these different new ways of trying to assess our economic and social performance and cultural performance together. There's one big insight. This is from Professor Kevin Anderson, and if it speaks to the potential of how we can bring about profound changes in consumption with, relatively speaking, modest changes. He crunched the numbers to come to the conclusion that if the richest tenth of the planet reduced consumption to the average EU level, it would cut global emissions by a huge 30%. So if you're asking people to reduce to just average EU levels of consumption, it's not the hair shirt brigade. There are other ways in which we try to build the conversation around well-being and how we could find high quality of life with lower ecological impact. We started a cultural conversation. We published this book, invited various people. This was, we even got something from a future prime minister called David Cameron at the time, which was rather odd, and some quite outspoken things in there actually, which have relatively stood the test of time very well, even if their behavior hasn't always. And then we started to kind of imagine what mean and asking questions, linking it to other work that the New Economics Foundation was doing about reimagining the places where we live. And we had done a series of work on the corrosion of local economies through the impact of globalization, the impact of the big supermarkets, and we started to pose questions about how our very high streets could become centers for different ways of living as communities, to have a different relationship to our stuff so that we don't just see high streets as places of passive consumption, but they could become the hearts of new economies. Where there are circular aspects to the economy, where we use things like some of the things we're going to hear a little bit more about, like share sheds, for example, and how we could reimagine based upon where we live. So we rooted it and grounded it in real physical space. I don't normally use slideshows, so I'm kind of making it up as I go along here, so I can't actually remember what I put in my next slide. So this was the pamphlet that Flo mentioned. This is where, with my colleague Ruth Potts, we thought about the way in which materialism has been kind of captured and has a particularly negative meaning. And we thought about the way that economies driven by debt and overconsumption and disposability had given us a dysfunctional relationship with the material world, when in fact, and also the irony of the way that environmentalists are seen as being a little bit hair shirt, a little bit rejectionist, when in fact it should all be about connection, reconnection, re-enchantment with the world, but with a different relationship based upon care and maintenance and indeed love. So this is a pamphlet in which we pose the question how you might love stuff in a healthy way and come up with some slightly different rules for it. So it's got a few historical examples in there, and we came up with our own little mini manifesto that it's, you know, even healthy to like stuff if you do it in a good way. Get to know things, be active with it, share. I won't go through all of it because we've only got a short amount of time. And bringing that conversation through to the moment, we've been living through a traumatic time. It's too trite to say that it's a teachable moment, but if we don't walk away from the experience of lockdown and the pandemic without learning some of the profound things about what was wrong with the economy, but also how we can work better and live differently to achieve higher levels of well-being, live better as communities and more equally, then it will be a tragic waste. With the Rapid Transition Alliance, we've tried to capture in a crowdsourced way some experiences people have had and find out what some of those lessons are. And there's certainly been something about the ways in which at home in our own time, removed from organized commercial entertainments, for example, and other opportunities for, I love the way some of the shops were giving advice at the height of the pandemic about only buy what you need. Heck, wouldn't that be good advice more generally anyway? But there were ways in which we started creating our own entertainment, ways in which we started making things and doing things for ourselves, cooking more. And we captured some of these in the Living with Less Stuff one. There's a short film to go with that as well. I think this is a really important moment, which has reminded us of our agency and our ability to change and change profoundly, and to put well-being and the well-being of others before short-term conventional economic interest. And I think this is one of the most important lessons that I've taken away about the possibilities for change. And one of the other issues that we're trying to raise at the moment, so that we can kind of create an atmosphere in which change can occur, is to take away the pressures that push us into being passive consumers and think of ourselves not as citizens with extended responsibilities, but merely as passive consumers fueled by debt. And we've launched a campaign called Advertising, which is about stopping adverts fueling the climate emergency. It also provides a critique of the way in which advertising functions to fuel consumption overall, even though we target some of the high carbon areas to begin with. I invite you to visit badverts.org and see what we're doing there, and let us know of examples that you might come across. So that's my whirlwind tour. I've got 1 minute left. There's the voice of flow. So I'm going to finish with, as this is all about well-being, I'm going to finish with a picture of flying squirrels for no other reason than I really like it. And I've got nothing else to say. So for the last minute, you're just going to look at flying squirrels. Aren't they fantastic? They're just great. Don't they make the world a better place? More space for flying squirrels, I say. The campaign for flying squirrels, pictures of them everywhere. That's it. No more.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew. And I mean, I'm tempted to just allow a minute of silence for the flying squirrels there, but no, that was a really wonderful run through of the amazing work that you've done in this area, and also, yeah, the great need to start kind of reframing our relationship with stuff for ourselves and for the planet. So really looking forward to getting some questions for Andrew, and we will have a chance to ask Andrew questions during the Q&A section of the event. If you do have a question, as you'll have seen some of my colleagues write in the chat box, if you've got a question, just pop a capital Q or a question in front of it, so that my colleagues can easily pick those out, and then we'll be coming to a Q&A section with all of our speakers when those questions, we'll get through as many as possible that you guys are asking. So please feel free to write your questions in the chat as we go along. Before I introduce our next speaker, I'd love to invite you to kind of reflect on how some of the issues that Andrew has introduced there relate to your own experience and your own connection with stuff. So we've got a poll question for you that's going to pop up on your screen now, which is, does consuming less ever make you happier? It's a bit of yeah, maybe see where that question lands with you. And obviously it's a somewhat of an oversimplified question. There's lots of issues surrounding it, but this is just to get an initial sense and get you kind of reflecting on your own relationship to this topic. So is it not at all? It makes me happier to buy lots of stuff. Not really. I'm happy being able to buy new things. Or sometimes it makes me happy to be conscious about what I buy. Or often consuming less makes you happy, so you try to buy as little stuff as possible. So I'll just give a few more seconds for you to choose your answer, and then I will end the poll and share the results with you guys. So as you somewhat might expect from this type of audience, we have most people in the sometimes and often, but it's a completely even split actually between the two. So we'll go into breakout rooms later, and we'll have a chance for you guys to share a little bit more with each other your reflections and experiences on this. But for now, I mentioned at the start that we really want to offer a balance of kind of an overview of this area, and also some specific practical examples of how to put some of these ideas into practice in campaigns and also in community projects. So now I'm going to hand over to my lovely colleague Mirella Ferraz, who is the project coordinator at the Network of Wellbeing and has led a lot of our initiatives in Devon in the UK, including community potluck meals, a Wellbeing seed grant, and most recently the Share Shed, a library of things, which is what she's going to share and talk about with you guys this evening. And she's also a writer for the media outlet Shareable, which is all about people-powered solutions for the common good. So she's very well plugged into this area, and I look forward to hearing your presentation, Lee.
Thank you, Flo, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. In light of what Andrew was saying about our ability to change, this is a project that supports various communities all over the world to do so. So it turns out that an electric drill is used in average up to 13 minutes in its whole lifetime, which is really crazy considering the amount of electric drills lying around in people's garages. And someone had that insight a long time ago and set up what's called nowadays Library of Things, which is essentially use the same principle as movies with stuff, in tools, including camping gear, household appliances, musical instruments, all sorts. And the idea is that you join a project, in our case, the Share Sheds. It's based in Devon, South Devon in the UK, where there are thankfully many projects all over the world nowadays. And you become a member as you would in a book library, and then we pay, in our case, we charge a small fee for each item, and you can borrow it and return in the following week. So we set it up here in Totnes in 2017. The image you can see, it's in the garage. The town council let us use it free of charge. And then we eventually moved to the high street where the Network of Wellbeing had an office. And that's how we've been progressing through time. And we started with 150 items, I believe. 95% have been donated by members of the community, which is again really wonderful because it just helps things, the flow of things. It really, that shift of mindset in terms of it's about access rather than ownership. So the aims of the project is really to support a much more collaborative and sustainable way of being. It really helps people save money, storage space, and obviously resources. It helps people to reduce clutter, and it makes that bridge between those who have things lying around in their garages or arctics and are not being used with people who are wanting to use those things. And whilst we want people to use these kind of projects and support these initiatives, ultimately is about people sharing more. So really engage in social change and consume differently. We were very fortunate in 2019 to be awarded a grant from the National Lottery Community Fund to create what it is, the first mobile library of things. And we were able to convert this beautiful van, which is a real shedding wheels, as we call it, and we travel around Devon because we realized over time that we had people from the nearby towns coming to us to borrow, our lawnmowers, and that's what prompted us to think, like, what if we went with them? By then we had been opened for 2 years. We had a very good insight of the most popular items, which also, it's important to notice. And so we could select what to put in the van and work out how to best store it. And it's the result of what I'm very proud to call our van. And we have at the moment we follow a weekly route that covers France in South Devon, including Totnes, Ashburton, Buckfastleigh in South Brent. And as I said, people borrow something on Monday and then they're supposed to return it in the following week. And just to give you a bit of, examples, I guess, we have here, a family who they were coming, they were visiting someone, they are from Japan, and they decided to go camping because the weather was very good. And they came to us and borrowed literally like everything from camping stove to tents to sleeping bags, camping chairs. And it's such a rewarding job to facilitate that and really see the direct impact it has in people's lives and abilities to do things. And also just a bit fun here to highlight how the variety of things that we have, including a unicycle. And, in this case, just like to have a go and, why not? And also lawnmowers, and Phil here, who is one of our members, has borrowed draining rods. And in this way, it really, helps everybody out. At the moment, we have over 350 items. So far, we've had over 1,000 people becoming members of the Share Shed, which has been amazing. Over 1,800 loans, and assuming that people would have bought, the item they borrowed, we estimate that our members have saved so far over £100,000, which is a lot of money. Our project wouldn't have been possible without the very generous and kind help from our volunteers. So I feel it's important to acknowledge that and really show some appreciation to them, including some who are here today. And and ultimately it's like, why buy when you can borrow? Really find out the ways of meeting your needs. Out of curiosity, here are 10 most popular items. We've learned there's some kind of seasonality to it, and yet ultimately, carpet cleaners and pressure washers are by far the most wanted items, certainly in the UK, from having talked with other projects too. And I just want also to say there are different models, and that's the thing, if you are considering setting a library of things in your community, which I totally encourage you to do, and we at the Share Shed, we are very happy to support you in that journey and have a chat with you. We have various resources available too. And just so there, in London, for instance, they have recently completely reorganized their system, so now it's completely kind of high tech. So it's all digital, and you have these kind of cupboards where you go with your card and it automatically opens in your items there. There's in Vancouver, they have used a shipping container to start the project up, and in Edinburgh, they have a makerspace around their library, the tool library in this case, the Edinburgh Tool Library. They are amazing. They have like thousands of tools there. And it's just really, in the same way that we started in a garage, that the council let us use it. I really encourage you to be creative in other ways of setting something up. Be in touch if that's something that you would like to do. I feel very passionate about spreading this message, because ideally we want, similar initiatives everywhere in all the communities. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Mirella. That's really wonderful to see such a concrete example of a library of things as a way to help support people to share more and consume less, but in a way that is really supportive of creating community connections and inspiring people to see stuff in a different way, essentially. So we've got some really interesting questions coming in on the chat box. So thank you so much to everyone who's connecting and engaging there. And just to encourage you guys to do that as much as possible, my colleague Roger is keeping a close eye on the questions, and we'll be making a note of them all, and we'll get through as many as possible. And we have two further speakers this evening, Malin Leth from Circulous and Ugo Vallauri from the Restart Project. And we're really looking forward to hearing their presentations. But what we thought we'd do at this stage of the event is just give you guys an opportunity to connect a little bit with each other, because I know that many people, you know, you've come to this event perhaps from a sense of personal interest, perhaps you're just kind of curious, but perhaps you're already engaged in this work, and it's helpful to kind of have an opportunity to share your views and your activities with each other. So what we're going to do now is go into breakout rooms just for 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to come back after 10 minutes and hear from the remaining two speakers, and then have a Q&A with the panel of speakers as a whole. So I'm going to put in the chat box, hopefully you'll see there now, just some brief prompts for discussions in the breakout room. So maybe you want to just make a note of those, and or take a screenshot, or just memorize, just make sure that you have a note of them in some way. It's essentially to briefly introduce yourself and where you're joining from, and explore what do you see as the links between consumption and your own well-being. So Andrew's shared some of the amazing initiatives that have kind of made that strong connection between consumption and well-being. What do you see as those links in your life, in your experience? And what do you see as the most promising ways to challenge overconsumption? So you've just heard from Mirella about one very concrete example of the share shed, but of course there are many others. So those three questions are invitations for you guys to share with each other, but also it's an invitation just to kind of connect and have a chat with each other. So I'll open the breakout rooms now. I'll just say beforehand, I really encourage you, even if you've had your camera off for the main part, it's great if you want to turn your camera on. The breakout rooms won't be recorded, so you can feel free to turn your camera on, unmute yourself, and just be a bit more in a very much smaller, informal space. And then I'll give you a little warning when we're about to come back into the main room to hear from the other amazing presenters that we have this evening. So I will open those rooms now, and hopefully you'll see an option to pop up to invite you to go into those rooms. So welcome back, those of you that have been in breakout discussions. I hope that you had the opportunity to connect and share with each other. I know it's always difficult in quite a short period of time, both to have that balance between being able to connect with each other, and sometimes you want to go deeper into your discussions. So I hope that you enjoyed having that, albeit brief, opportunity to connect with each other. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker in a moment. Like I just wanted to share what we've got planned for the rest of the evening. We've got two more speakers who are going to give 10-minute presentations, and then we're going to offer a way for you to stay connected with each other, because you've been in smaller groups there, and it's lovely to connect with a few people, but an opportunity to maybe share briefly with each other what you're up to in a kind of document format. And then we'll have a question and answer session with the speakers, and we'll be wrapping up at 9 o'clock London time. So I'm going to introduce our third speaker of this evening, which is Malin Leth. And yeah, really excited to learn about the work of Circulous. So Malin is the founder of Circulous and impact leader scholar at Singularity University, and she's got a real passion for participatory governance, resource utilisation and systems change. And so really looking forward to what Malin has to share with us this evening about the circular economy and how that links to the topics that we've been discussing. Over to you, Malin.
Wow, thank you so much for the introduction. And yes, indeed, I will try to combine and connect all the dots that we have been hearing from the other speakers, because I will combine the wellbeing economy, zero waste and circular economy, and in urban spaces, because most of us relate to them. So then the way we need to move to a wellbeing economy is as a context-based collective. And it is, of course, just as much about the journey as it is the destination. So as I said, we will look at how urban spaces could serve as amplifiers in the transition towards a wellbeing economy, and how that is connected to the consumption of zero waste, or the consumption and zero waste, I'm sorry. So urban spaces, they play a large role in the living and well-being of all people on the planet, but also, of course, the economy. These two are built on old structures as we know it today, and they don't support the systematic transformation that we know that we need. So the number of people living in urban areas is projected to increase rapidly in the coming decades, which means, of course, an increased pressure on how urban spaces reflect the needs of the community, not only in terms of the pressure on how these areas are working as in technical infrastructure, but also, of course, in understanding as how they actually meet the needs of the community. So in order to use these urban spaces as some sort of driver for change, we really need to understand what we as individuals and as a collective need. As in, yeah, for real. We have been talking about consumption, and of course, this is all about that. So I'm talking about consumptions from a mindset shift trigger perspective. So we all know that we must quit our wasteful practices. And in doing so, the only reasonable solution to that is to reuse our resources repeatedly, as we aim to systematically shift the society from a linear economy to resources long-term management. We could use these urban spaces as amplifiers. So they could actually be seen as a large stock of resources that we could reuse, repurpose, or recycle. Instead of designing these areas focusing on consuming products with a limited lifespan, we could rethink and unlearn standard practices and emulate nature, mimic nature, see the environment as a flow of regenerative processes in which nothing is wasted. You know, in nature, whatever that is, like the end product of something, is actually food for something else to come and grow. So just like how nature's ecosystems work with a collective of species, urban spaces start and end with community. And we have been talking, of course, about, and I suppose you also talked about that in the group, how we could move away from consumerism and maybe even commercialism. And society is built around the consumption of stuff that most likely could be labeled as wants and not needs. We might know that. We usually tend to buy what we think we need, but it's most probably a want. So looking beyond the current economy, the shift towards regeneration is where we move from commercialism to life, to well-being, to the abundance of resources. So we must stop building or rebuilding urban areas that focus on linear consumerism and commercialism. And I feel I cannot emphasize enough that waste, it is a net cost, and resources, it actually can, or they can, regenerate the economic system. So it always comes down to these circles and loops of how we use resources. And looking for concrete action, urban spaces can support and strengthen localized solutions, and that by putting reuse in practice and at scale at local level. We can help build back a better future with urban spaces and an economy that serves the community. And looking specifically at a well-being economy and circular economy and the connection to zero waste, all resources have value and there is no waste. And as I said, it's all about reusing what we already have in our system. Since waste impacts our economy at scale, we design a life with no landfills or incinerators and no waste export to other countries. That's really problematic, and I will talk a little bit more about that soon. And localized solutions and reuse of existing materials, it also means less pollution, less toxins, and less harmful chemicals in our lands, waters, and air. So the problem looking at our wasteful practices from more of a production perspective is that the majority of the waste is invisible. What we see as end consumers is the visible waste, the packaging or the end product. And the current economic system that we have, it's supporting the invisible waste. So looking at the global economy at scale, 2/3 of the resources that we use every year to produce what we want is wasted, 2/3, which is crazy. However, this waste, it is invisible to us as consumers. We don't see those 2/3. It's generated upstream in the extraction and production of a product. The economy is designed right now to incentivize wasteful practices rather than the opposite. That means it costs less to extract than it does to restore or reuse, making it less likely for large-scale initiatives towards smarter utilization of resources to actually happen. One of the most significant global challenges is dealing with the waste generated in consumer-intensive countries. The more we consume, the more waste we produce. We must break the link, therefore, between economic growth and increased waste generation. It is estimated that the 2 billion tons of waste generated every year will increase by 70% by 2050. Our waste management system, as it is now, cannot handle the situation, and we totally understand from this that it won't be able to handle the increase by 2050. And as I mentioned, the global waste trade, and specifically the plastic trade, is of course a challenge, because exporting plastic waste is nothing else than the export of a problem that the region causing it must take responsibility for. And worth noting is that the EU is the world's largest exporter of plastics, and the US is the single country that exports the most plastics. So sometimes I wonder, and I think you might wonder as well, like, from the global discussion, how come local governments in importing countries are being blamed for not having the appropriate waste management or recycling infrastructure in place? And it's so interesting, because what's actually being recycled in consumer-intensive countries, it serves as a signaling device of that same problem. So the nation that's generating waste must be able to reuse, compost, or recycle it in the same region. Looking at solutions, then, as I've been talking about this massive challenge, some of the proposed strategies for solving the global waste challenge and achieving a zero waste vision are, of course, then to make the leap from single use to reuse. To achieve this, we must stop and reflect, just as we do today, and ask ourselves what products are on the market that our system cannot handle. What cannot be reused, composted, or recycled? The solution here is to ensure that products have value and people don't waste them. Instead, we manage these resources over and over again. And transitioning towards this zero waste society means taking action for what we call turning off the tap on the visible and invisible waste that enters the environment, at the same time as mopping the floor, so cleaning the world's oceans and lands from accumulated waste. Proposed solutions could, of course, be summarized by the R's, the foundation of zero waste, which are refuse business as usual, fossil-based virgin material and unnecessarily single-use items, reduce the total footprint, reuse products over and over again by refilling or repairing, repurposing, returning, or maybe composting, for example, and recycle whatever that's left, and then, of course, restoring the planet from the harm caused for all ecosystems to thrive again. However, going for reuse at scale is, of course, there are some obstacles. Looking at national plastic pacts, which I'm also working with, there are a lot of them in the world, and all of them have yet to report progress on the scale up on reuse in practice. But except for reuse at scale, there are a lot of concrete actions that take us closer to the zero waste vision. We see zero waste plans for regions and cities that are widely developed, and waste collection and prevention plans are growing in numbers, as well as bans on single-use plastic products. But now we have been looking at this from a governmental perspective or policy perspective, and what could it look like from a business? Well, looking at principles that business usually start working with is, of course, to reduce the waste leakage, both upstream and downstream. It could be, of course, for example, by aligning with better practices throughout the production and design of products so that they don't end up as waste. So usually they ask themselves, is a material used in an existing product that's hard to recycle in a current waste management system? This is the guiding question that breaks down the silence between waste management and product design, because we know that 80% of a product's environmental footprint is determined in the design phase. Okay.
Just to let you know.
Yeah, thank you. So summarizing all of this, Looking at the transition towards a well-being economy and urban spaces, of course, there is a lot left to be done, though it all starts with us as a collective, the community and how we use our resources. And in this transition, it's we as individuals that stop being consumers and start being users of our resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malin, and like a really comprehensive overview of how we can rethink the consumption cycle and actually transition into a more circular way of consuming rather than the current linear system. Thank you so much. And you mentioned, or you briefly touched upon the idea of repair as part of that like really important regeneration cycle, which leads on nicely to our next speaker and our final speaker of the evening, Ugo Vallauri, who's the co-founder and policy lead of the Restart Project, which is a London-based charity which is fixing our relationship with electronics. So by encouraging people to use their electronics longer and collecting and sharing data from community repair initiatives globally on recurrent barriers to repair, Restart pushes for legislation for the right to repair in the UK and across Europe. So really, taking us on that journey from the kind of wider reasons for changing our relationship to consumption and the wider ways that we can change to, again, another really specific practical example that can apply in our own direct lives and more widely. So over to you, Ugo, for your presentation.
Thank you. And let me try to share my screen and get started. Hope you can see it. So our motto for forever has been don't despair, just repair. And the reason for despairing are many, but there is reasons for hope. And don't forget, at the end of the presentation, I will ask you to help us in one simple way. And so don't forget about the end of the presentation. But meanwhile, let's get started by looking at why we started focusing on repair. We've been active as an organization since 2012. We weren't even an organization then, and we started running community repair events. And the reason was that we think that we lost our muscle for repair, and that a bit like the world in which WALL-E was situated, people were completely controlled by machines, but they lost touch with them and not thinking about the wider context in which they were. But equally, we're also in a world where if you do think about some of the products in our daily lives, like printers, for example, you are easily frustrated and can't wait to destroy one that stops working way too quickly and isn't repairable or doesn't accept refilled cartridges that are the least wasteful way to operate them. And what we wanted from the beginning was to find inspirational opportunities for everyone to learn more about how the things that we own work. And by knowing more about how things work and doing it together with others that already have that knowledge, we all learn something new, and we all learn to appreciate things in a different way, and we care for them more. And that's how we started. But our vision goes well beyond just running pop-up repair events. It's about having true stewardship of products. It's about thinking about jobs of the future that are the repair jobs. And it's about seeing how repair can become a way of thinking about how our cities are organized. Our recycle centers should become reuse centers, touching on what Malin was saying earlier, how modding, improving, upgrading, personalizing things can lead to thinking differently and reacting to some of the bad advertising and the greenwashing that we are that's pushed towards us by manufacturers and advertisers. And it all goes back to the point that the most ethical product is the one you already have, whether it's a mobile phone or something else. And in the case of mobile phones, smartphones, it's crucial that we realize that the very, very vast majority of the embodied emissions lays with the manufacturing phase. So for many phones, over 70% of the overall impact of the phone will have occurred before you switched it on the very first time, which means that the only way to reduce our impact is to extend the useful lifetime of the product as much as possible, and fixing some of the barriers that prevent us from doing so. So it's about consuming less, consuming in a more mindful way, and being able to have control over the products that we have. Now, community repair shows very clearly there's plenty of people that want to repair more and want to avoid having to buy a new thing for many different good reasons, including the fact that they might be attached to the product that they already have. They don't necessarily want to have to learn a new product, how it works. And in many cases, people simply don't have the option to choose. And repair is the only way that can continue to let them have access to a product. And by doing events ourselves and supporting a global network and collaborating with other organizations around the world, we've been collecting evidence about the barriers to repair. And these are important because they help us fight and campaign for the right to repair. The right to repair, this is a slide taken from our European Right to Repair campaign that we co-founded, is about having products that are designed well and creating the conditions for fair access to spare parts and repair information, and making sure that consumers are actually informed about the true impact of the products, but also how repairable they are, so that green claims around the sustainability of products are not tolerated if we don't have access to real information, transparent information from the manufacturers. And the UK public really does want the government to take action on this aspect. And that's why we are campaigning for the right to repair, both in the UK and in Europe. Why? Because this is under threat in terms of, despite the big announcements that the government has made, there is no assurance at the moment that people will have access to affordable spare parts, repair manuals, and all diagnostic software, and that all products will be designed to be repaired. And often there is a lot more access for professional repairers, but we need it spread to society at large, including community repair initiatives all over, and people like you and I. There's been some progress in the UK with a strong report by the Environmental Audit Committee that asked government to take action and bring ambitious right to repair legislation. But many of the points have been dismissed by the government in its response, and they announced the new legislation that will come to Parliament in a few weeks. But that is merely putting to the UK the legislation that the government already signed off when still part of the EU, and that in any case in Europe has already been approved. We need a lot more than that if we are to prevent unnecessary waste, and not forgetting that e-waste is the fastest, if one of the fastest, it is not the fastest stream of waste across the world, and the UK is the second per capita producer of e-waste around the whole world. And here comes my ask for you tonight. As more and more terms such as right to repair are co-opted by governments and by manufacturers, trying to give us half of what we really need in terms of access to truly repairable products, affordable solutions to keeping them in circulation, and more and more barriers in terms of even the software that comes with these products, which is not updated for long enough. preventing a lot of the secondary markets for products from being effectively functioning. We need more, and we need your help to push for much more ambitious policies in this area. This is something that is a concern at European level and at UK level. And as more people are hearing about this topic, about right to repair, it's a great opportunity to ask for a real right to repair, starting with more products being covered and removing financial barriers as well. The UK is in an interesting position, having left the EU, now has more control over financial, over VAT, for example. And in this country, currently repairs on yachts are 0 rated for VAT, while repairs of your electronics and electrical appliances are 20%. Probably we can do better than that. If you agree and want to get involved, there's a petition on our website, therestartproject.org, that you can sign, and you can get involved with our community, learning more and pushing for a true, improved, real right to repair and a better relationship with the products we already own. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ugo. Yeah, wonderful to have such a clear call to action there. And just to let everyone know that we will be sharing all of the links from this event this evening. So we'll share the link to the petition Ugo mentioned. Of course, you're welcome to sign it now, but we'll share it in the follow-up email, as well as links to all of the speakers' work and a link to the recording of this event itself. So if you're wondering or have been inspired by things that have been shared and would like to share more widely, that there will be an opportunity to do so following the event. Thank you so much again for all the questions that have been coming in the chat box. I know Roger's been, my colleague Roger's been making a note of the many questions coming in. Just before, we're going to have a Q&A session now with all 4 speakers and pose some of the questions that you've been asking. But just before we do so, I just want to briefly share a way for you guys to stay in touch with each other. I mentioned this briefly earlier. So what we have done is just put together a really simple Google document contact list that I'm putting the link to in the chat box now, which is essentially just a list of people's first and last names that have signed up for this event. None of your personal information is included in there at the moment, it's just names. But if you would like to, you're very welcome to add any details that you'd like. So whether it be your email, your social media, your website, into that document, so that you have the opportunity to share your details with others at this event, and also check out other people that are putting their details in there. So the link is in the chat box, and you're welcome to do that now. Equally, I just wanted to introduce it and give the opportunity now. It will also be included in the follow-up email. So if you're thinking that sounds great, but I'd rather just take part in the Q&A now, that's totally fine as well. But it's an option there if you would like to add your details now. And that will be just available for the rest of this discussion, and we'll share the link afterwards. So feel free to do that at your own pace. And feel free to drop questions in the chat if anything about that is unclear. But for now, we are going to move on to the Q&A section of this evening. So bringing back Andrew, Mirella, Malin and Ugo all together into a kind of more open sharing discussion. There's been some questions for particular speakers, and then some more broad questions that are kind of relevant for everyone, let's say, and whoever would like to come in can maybe just, and if no one does, I might pick on you guys. But I think I'll start with quite a broad question from David, which is a big challenge for introducing these concepts, is that people generally think that if they consume less, their quality of life will diminish. And greater well-being, of course, isn't just about consuming less. with some things we do need to consume more, such as leisure time and nature. So is consuming less the right message, and how do we best get the message across? And I actually think this is something that touches on, a few other people have kind of touched on messaging and how do we, so Amy's asked about the idea of kind of green status. So I think there's this kind of question around what's the right message and how do we get that across to people that are maybe more resistant to hearing it. So I don't know whether it makes sense to go to you first on that, Andrew, and then others can chip in as they'd like to.
Yeah, really happy to. I mean, it's a really interesting question, and it's a judgment call. And I mean, the first thing I'd say is that I don't think there's a kind of a single way in which there's not a perfect message. I think there's lots of things that have to be said. I think one of the things that have to be demonstrated, and I think this goes to the old adage about good writing, which is always show, don't tell. I think one of the most important things that we have to illustrate and demonstrate and also model are the ways in which higher well-being and greater quality of life can be had through engaging in activities which are low impact. I think we have to kind of demonstrate that. And I think some of the things which have occurred, I mean, this is, I don't want to sound too much like a kind of a cliche, but at the height of the one of the first lockdown, when there was much less traffic on the road and people were getting out and walking in green space more, and the roads and the pavements were quieter, and almost a cliche, but there were literally children were out playing on pavements and chalking on pavements in ways that were not done before. People were engaging in conversations with neighbors. We were kind of thrown into relationship with each other. We started to notice the nature in our local urban green spaces more. These were all things which were inherently, low impact, low consumption activities. And I think there was a sense of release and liberation in them. And I don't want to kind of overstate it because it has been a very difficult and traumatic period as well. But I think once you can see the possibility of something and you can experience it, you're much more likely to take it up. I think it is also the case that we live with a lack of information about the full impact of a lot of our activities. So at the same time as modeling and showing, rather than telling, the good possibilities for higher well-being, lower impact living, we can also engage in a process of education that allows people to realize that, that you can obsess about plastic straws and feel that gives you a kind of a free pass to take a long-haul flight. Yes, there's also a practical and a factual education process that needs to go on too. But I think now that we're in this moment where everybody's talking about, can we build back better? We need new visions for our high streets and how we, engage. I think we've lived through a period which has given us some hints, some sort of flickers, some glimpses of how things could be done better. So I realize that's quite a big picture sort of response, but it is quite a big picture question as well.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Andrew. And would any of the other speakers like to kind of come in and add anything to what Andrew said there, Malin?
Yeah, I could echo that as well. And I could also just add to, there's a quote that I love, that's from the minimalists that say, love people and use things because the opposite never works. And with emphasis on use things, we don't need the ownership, we need distributed usership, I would say instead. So that's what I would add.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's so important. And I think in a way that touches on, Mirella, the project that you shared, and consuming in a different way and using things in a different way. So thank you very much. Ugo and or Mirella, would you like to add anything before we move on? And interesting, just to bring in, I see Gabriella's comment in the chat box, which I think is important to acknowledge. Of course, like you were saying, Andrew, in some ways, consumption minimized during lockdown, and we saw this, quite stark transitions. And then in other ways, unfortunately, consumption of plastics and driving, some of the kind of more impactful, environmentally impactful behaviours, you could arguably say went up. So it was a bit of a mixed picture. And I guess in a way that leads on to a question we've had from Lisa, which is how do we encourage the consumption of less within the current political system that depends on capitalising on our consumption behaviours? So, yeah, although there was, you can see some signs of change, then we sometimes feel stuck within this kind of somewhat broken system. So yeah, would anyone like to pick up on Amy's question and that comment generally? Ugo?
Yeah,
And then Andrew.
Okay, I'd just one thing I think that kind of also links with what we were, the previous answer, which is, I think we need to be able to consume in a more informed way, which of course accessing the access economy and being able to use things owned by others, so that's great. For some products that we use more regularly, I mean, we still think that, you know, developing a better understanding of what are the impacts of products and being able to choose more transparently products that are indeed more easier and to repair, for example. But it's not just about that. It's also knowing better what's behind that product, and so that we make a choice of a product that's longer lasting, and so that it's not throwaway, where you build a better connection, basically. And I think that also links with Andrew mentioned the new materialism in his first in his presentation, and it's about developing a different relationship with the things in our life. And some, sure, we don't need, full stop. Some others, we don't need them to be single use. And other things, we want them purely to be as useful as possible and as reusable and upgradable, improvable, so that we can keep them with our life for as long as possible in a way to become less wasteful.
Yeah, thank you.
Just really quickly to add and come back on that point. I mean, one always has to be very careful about how one frames one's remarks. I wasn't at all trying to say that we've lived through some kind of like perfect nirvana in which all the answers have been revealed. Of course, there's been emergent issues and problems which reveal the underlying problems. But I think it's also really important that we look at moments to see what we can learn from them. And I think some of the really interesting things through the period of the last 18 months, which has just shown the degree to which that both in terms of individual behavior changes, where people have changed their behaviors in respect of the importance of kind of public health and well-being. And of course, there's been a few well-reported examples, exceptions to that rule as well. But by and large, people have altered their behavior patterns to respect the importance of public health and well-being and look after each other. But perhaps the most important thing that it's revealed is the degree to which at speed and scale, we have the agency to change how we behave. We've also got the agency to introduce novel economic policies, and we've also seen ways in which, in a very short period of time, various industries and producers have innovated and adapted and converted their production to new and different purposes. Now, what that tells me is that we've got more agency for change at speed, motivated by mutual concern and mutual kind of respect for each other's well-being, than is often reflected in the day-to-day assumptions about human nature and how the economy works. So I'm looking at it for what we can learn from it, not as a period of time which has been perfect. I do think that overall, in terms of overall consumption, the figures that we've shown do tend to suggest that there was actually a dip in total consumption as well, and a lot more experimentation in people kind of, doing their own cooking, which has lots of other benefits as well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So just to be really clear.
Yeah, no, thank you, Andrew. I think it's, like you say, it's a complex picture, and it's really helpful to add some nuance there. And Mirella, Anna, or Malin, would you like to come in before we move on to the next question?
I could just add with the perspective on like us as consumers, and we are standing there, we need to choose something, we have these different trade-offs, we know, or maybe we just don't know anything that's enough for us to make the good choice. What if then producers could provide the market with products or resources that actually were good from start, instead of us having this massive responsibility of trying to make a choice that's uninformed? That would be nice.
Yeah, that in a way that leads on to the next question I was going to share with you guys, which is Anders has asked, so many radical ideas have actually been co-opted into the political mainstream. Some of you have touched on this in a way. And is the discussion to a shift to a well-being economy any different today? Does it offer more of an economy to really shift societal priorities, and if so, why? And I guess I'd quite like to come to you, back to you, Malin, first on this question, in the sense that often that same criticism is leveled at the circular economy. You know, has it been co-opted by big business? And then I know also you've worked together with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance on a kind of wellbeing economic policy paper. And so, yeah, maybe you could just speak from both of those, like that level of experience.
Yeah. So to start with, like, what makes it different from both theory and what's happening in practice? That gaps needs to be closed, and before any politicians or businesses start to wash it, we need to stay to the core concept of it. And both for wellbeing economy, circular economy, and zero waste, it all starts with the community. So bottom-up approaches. There have been critics saying that we shouldn't even mention bottom-up because it's still like a hierarchical manner, but community-based, where it's the community that create the vision. It's they that create the targets. It's also they that evaluate if we actually achieved what we were supposed to do. So if we make that shift from what we have now, which is a limited number of people that decide and evaluate, and going for a community perspective, then what happens in practice will totally shift from what we see today and what governments and businesses are doing. But looking also at the Wellbeing Economy Policy Design Guide that I was in the drafting team of working with last year, it's put into practice at some steps. We are seeing wellbeing economic budgets. We are seeing wellbeing economic principles that are put into practice when it comes to even making institutionalized fragments for structuring a society. It could be for involving citizens in allocating budgets for urban development projects. It could even be, I've seen examples of citizens being able to, or being involved to participate in deciding upon business development. That's a new thing, like us as citizens deciding for what businesses, like in which way it would go. So yeah, a lot is happening. It's still small steps, but also we need to remember that the wellbeing economy has been around for ages. So it's not a new concept. It's just that it's us looking at it right now and trying to see how it could fit in a larger scale.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Malin. And we'll include a link to the wellbeing policy paper in the follow-up email as well. And just to kind of build on that question, there was a specific question for you, Ugo, about what you think about IKEA's new ad Frugal Life, selling things that last. And again, this is a bit that kind of tension between, is this co-option or is it a genuine shift? And I wonder if you've seen it and have any opinions.
So I haven't seen that. I can, however, comment on another initiative that they've launched very recently, postponed a few months due to the pandemic, like this buyback of some of their own existing furniture and reuse in that fashion. I think there is truly a risk that no matter how genuine that individual initiative, that, you know, like it's a bit like a manufacturer that decides to make one product of their whole series of products repairable. And so I think people should decide for themselves how whether they need a new product and whether they need something that's long lasting and repairable, and then take these claims and be able to process them, keeping in mind their own experiences. And, you know, we all have some furniture from IKEA. It's more about, let's try to use less in general and get access to secondhand things if you can, and always question whether you need an extra thing.
I love that in your presentation, the most sustainable phone is the one that you have, and really the concept that the share shed builds on as well, the kind of sharing of things together that we have, rather than needing to kind of always consume something new. So we're drawing towards the end of our time together, and I'd like to just ask one final brief question. Kind of quite a few of the questions this evening have been drawing on kind of messaging and reaching people, and how do we kind of frame this in a way that actually brings people on board, let's say. So, you know, Andrew, you mentioned the kind of negative side of the advertising and going against and reframing bad advertising. I wonder, to flip that and look at the positive, what's like one positive message that you would like to leave the audience with this evening, that you would think is a kind of succinct message that people can take away and share about the concepts and practices that we've been discussing? So it's a bit of a big ask, because I know that this is something that a lot of people are working on, you know, how do you succinctly communicate this? But just what's the one key message that you feel most passionately about that you'd like to share? And that's a question for everyone, so maybe we can just go around. So Mirella, over to you first.
Why buy when you can borrow?
Wonderful, thank you, Mirella. Very succinct.
No, I'm not the author of it, it's just fine, but
Yeah.
it's certainly, yeah, it's an important message to be shared.
Very, very powerful. And would anyone maybe just raise your hand if you're ready? Andrew?
Yeah, I think I'd say it's a really good question. How on earth do you boil it all down? The thing which leapt into my mind when you posed it was quite simply that making makes you feel better than passively consuming or passively observing. Being involved is better than being a bystander in some way. That's what works for me.
Wonderful, thanks, Andrew. And Malin?
Yeah, I'm very passionate about the decision-making phase, so I would love to have a giveaway around the decision-making. So it's so easy to take a passive stance and feel that it's all these organizations that make awful decisions or such, but it's actually us as individuals. It's I as an individual that take decisions in my home, when I go shopping, or at my work, or in an organization that I'm involved with. So it's all of us, whether we are in a professional roles or in academia, or wherever we are. It's us, it's we that make decisions. So remember that we can always make a good decision.
Wonderful, thank you, Malin. And Ugo?
Sorry, I was answering to one of the messages. So for me, one of the things that was extremely positive in the last few months was that people started thinking along our lines from different angles. So less just the people that care so much about the environment, but also people thinking in terms of digital access. And so we've seen an amazing response when we ask people to donate, pass on the things that they were no longer using, laptops, from maybe 8 to 10 years old laptops that could be perfectly fine with a free and open source operating system for children that didn't have access. And so this is a turning point where we can talk about reducing waste and empowering more justice in the way we access things. So I'm passionate about this turn of events.
Wonderful. That's a really inspiring range of messages there that I feel like could be condensed into a beautiful manifesto or something. But thank you for sharing your thoughts and reflections. And yeah, that we're drawing to the end of our time together now. So thank you so much to the speakers this evening. Thank you so much to everyone that's joined us for your active participation, your amazing questions. We will send around the recording, like I say, and all of the resource links. Just a final thing that we love to do at these events is just take a screenshot of the event to share on social media afterwards. So I will do that now just to give you a heads up. If you're happy to be in the screenshot, please leave your camera on and do your screenshot smile. And if you'd prefer not to be, then feel free to turn your camera off. So I'll just, yeah, feel free to wave. Lovely. Thanks, guys. Okay, so yeah, thank you so much for joining us. The Network of Wellbeing has regular online events, so I'll include the links to our future events in the follow-up email as well, and we look forward to staying in touch and staying connected. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.